everyone. Welcome to the Genetic Genius Podcast. I'm so thrilled for my guest today, Jennifer Wallace. Welcome.
Hi, Dr. Lulu. It is so great to be here with you today, and I'm really excited about our conversation.
Yay, me too. So today we're going to be talking all about DNA, and especially as a part about how we can repattern the brain in the subconscious way to really tap into healing the DNA from that trauma perspective. And there's going to be an awesome conversation. We're going to have some really good things. So tune in and stay in for the whole conversation today. I can't wait. So before we could jump on in, Jennifer, can you tell me a little bit about yourself so the listeners can get to know you and we can lay the groundwork for our conversation today?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I am someone who deeply believes in healing and have transcended deep subconscious patterns that are really tied to the core wounds that I've experienced. I am someone that has been really blessed with a lot of suffering in my life, and I've had to overcome a lot to even just be here with you today. I am a breast cancer survivor, stage 3 HER2. I'm a sex trafficking survivor, and I have early childhood sexual trauma. So that altogether created a very imbalanced nervous system and a deep disconnection, not only from self, but from spirit. And so I love to talk about healing just because of my own experiences in the world and really what I have helped my clients transcend and go through as well. I think trauma healing is, it sounds painful, some of the things I've been through, but I really believe like breast cancer for me was the portal to my awakening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I love that. When we have that own personal connection, it helps us to relate more to what's really tapping in to help us heal, whether that's that physical piece, the emotional piece, or the spiritual piece, which of course all are connected, but sometimes we don't have them all happening at the same moment in time that we can relate to.
Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that as far as expansion goes, if you want expansion in whatever area of your life that is, whether that's healing, relationship to spirit, you need a balance of all of those because it's very easy to spiritually bypass your nervous system. And it's easy to get into a really psychological state of healing or a physiological state of healing and not do the spirit work. And it's really about balance.
Right. Oh, that's so true. Yeah, you can't have one without the other. I think then I work a lot with patients from that same trauma perspective, just helping them to be aware of the connection between all of those three. And without healing the emotional body, we really can't pivot our healing to true healing. So it's like that superficial healing, I think, until we can really dive deep in. So let's talk about, I'd love for us to hear more about your personal journey. I know you mentioned it, but how did that kind of lead you into your practice today? Where does that make sense? Where it ignited your own, you're like, okay, yeah, I experienced this. And then now I'm so ready to help others.
In 2009, and my story comes in different pieces.
Right.
The first part of it never is linear, right?
Right. Yeah.
The first part of my story starts in 2009. I had spent some time in London. I have a fine arts degree from a London university, and I spent some time traveling through Turkey where I was taken. And that's a really great, fun story, although it's very intense, but I make it, obviously. I stabbed my captor and got out of the house, found the police, went back through there. Eventually he was caught. So when I returned back home, I'm from Virginia originally. I was even in higher states of fight and flight. That's what I would now call it. I was under constant chronic stress and hypervigilance. And 5 years later, I was diagnosed with stage 3 HER2 positive breast cancer. And I mean, there is no really good breast cancer to get or any good cancer, but I got a really bad one. HER2 is a protein gene that we carry in our hearts, and mine went mutant out of a toxic environment. So it really caused me to wake up. What was I doing to my body? How was I living? How was I apart from spirit? Because part of me getting out of Turkey, there is a level of divine intervention that happened in that moment, because after I stabbed him, I really thought he was going to stab me. There was a 9-inch carving knife on me. And so then getting the breast cancer, I wasn't really certain how those two were connected. And so I started this journey of healing in 2014 when I got into recovery. That was really 2015. And what that led me to was eventually feeling safe enough for my subconscious mind to let me know that I had early childhood sexual trauma from the ages of 3 to 5.
Mm.
And so from there, I started to learn about ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. And I had a pretty average ACE score of 4. And that is where I believe the breast cancer really comes from, because when I look back on my early childhood, I can really see the dissociation. There are years of my life that I cannot remember. And that's
Wow.
all coming back now as I do more deeper healing work. But so once I get to Turkey in 2009, I was so dysregulated in my nervous system that of course I got cancer. My body could not keep up with those oscillating stages of fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
And I was heavily drinking at some point in my life too, because I was using food and alcohol to regulate and to show up as with my family or with my friends or at my job. And so I had a big dependency there for quite a while on alcohol. And luckily that's gone, but it's all been part of a journey. But everything for me always goes back to that early trauma.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for one, helping us to understand your path in that journey, but also helping us to understand that connection to childhood, which is, I think, so many of us. And I love what you said about that disconnection and now being able to relate to it and then having it becoming full forward now, where you're like having those memories come back in, because I think that's so true. Our body says, hey, I can't really deal with that right now. I'm going to put it up on the shelf. I'm going to disassociate. And then sometime in the future, maybe I'll be able to come back and relate to it, especially as children, when we're in that traumatic space. We just don't have the tools all the time to deal with it.
No, we don't. And the brain is such magnificently powerful thing. And it will hide things from you so that it can keep you alive. It's its only job is for you to show up alive every day. And it will give you the outputs of dependency, of addiction, of pain, of binging. Really, how am I going to keep this girl alive?
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah. And the sympathetic nervous system just is only able to handle so much. So it says, okay, I can't be in that situation. So I'll remove myself. And like you said, find some other way to communicate, whether that's through an addiction or through a complete sense of false self, where we have this outside image where we're portraying to others around us, hey, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, like the glass just breaks. It's like, I really wasn't that fine.
Yeah, totally. And I believe and you just said something, it's like a fragmented part of your essence really gets buried. And then you have all these other protector selves showing up for you wherever they need to show up so that you can be here.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. And so then it sounds trauma perspective, we're almost like sewing those pieces back together, making that new quilt, so to speak, of our body. And how I think a lot of people compartmentalize physical body, emotional body, and spiritual body. And can you talk a little bit about why maybe that is and the importance of bringing those three pieces together for that like complete spiritual healing, or not spiritual healing, but complete body, holistic healing?
Sure. I think it's easy to do that because healing can be a really overwhelming process. It's not glitter and rainbows. It is going into the depths of your wounds. And I'm a huge believer that your wounds birth your wombs of your purpose, of what you are here for. And as far as for me, when I think of the nervous system, although we are spirits in human bodies, in human form, and we are divine, we also operate on the 3D level with a brain and with a nervous system. And in that nervous system, you have the chakra system, and then you've got the emotional body. And emotions, as we know, get trapped in places of our body. The body keeps the score. And so it's about, I think, having the nervous system perspective first creates safety in the body. And when you can feel safe in the body, you can expand into other areas of healing. And so I think that's a really great place to start. It was really the foundation, I think, for my expansion and transcending of being able to look at the patterns that were coming up, being able to look at how I was living as a divine creator. What am I bringing in? But I can't do that unless I don't feel safe in my body. And if I'm
Right.
dissociated, how can I connect to self? And so for that, it's all about vagus nerve training.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's okay, I feel safe. Now, what else can I do? Let me see if I can open my heart chakra. I've been living in such an ego place for so long, but okay, let me drop into the heart. Now, how can I create?
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. And that safety piece is so important for healing. I think a lot, especially with chronic illness, like autoimmune disease, patients create this shell around them of safety, right? And then their body says, the only way that I can feel safe is to almost like attack against myself to create others to see me and help me. They're creating this alternative reality of their illness.
And a lot of times, getting back to that essence, our essence gets buried. And I think a lot of healing work is about sloughing off what doesn't serve us, the narratives that we are taught by society, by diet culture, patriarchal constructs. There's a lot of systems of oppression out there that if you don't dismantle internally, you can't work to serve to heal the world.
Exactly. I love that. And so when we're talking about moving into or opening that doorway, right, into healing, how does the subconscious piece, that subconscious repatterning fit into that? And what's the importance of accessing that subconscious piece for the doorway to open?
When you are developing in the womb and your brain starts developing, your subconscious mind is there first. That's the old brain, the first brain, the reptilian brain, right? We hear all of these words are trendy now in a healing space. But the human part of us, the part of us that we want to manifest from, that we want to live from, is the front part of our brains, right? The prefrontal cortex. That's the human part. But this front part is meant to inhibit the back part. But when we are living from this back part, you're living in states of survival, and the patterns that you create a lot of time are pre-verbal. They come from your primary caregivers. A lot of times they contain limiting beliefs that are not yours, that are untrue. And then we start living in those places and creating literally the world around us. Your subconscious mind, it's the gatekeeper. It is responsible for 80% of your lived experience. So how are you showing up? How is scarcity, for instance, showing up? Are you someone who you let your bank account get really low and then you think, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And then you radically pull it off. And how exciting is that? That's a pattern. Are you showing up? Because as you show up anywhere is how you show up everywhere. So then where else are you feeling scarcity? Is that scarcity showing up in your relationships, in your partnerships, in your work? Right. And for those subconscious patterns, living in them is what is creating your world. If you are someone who every time you go to level up, you get knocked down, maybe you get an injury, maybe something happens. That's a pattern because you don't feel safe to level up. And it's safer for the brain to say, oh, you know what? We're good at this.
Right.
We're going to take this neural pathway. This is what I understand. And as you are creating change and creating new neural networks, new pathways, the brain is always going to do something to change what you're doing. It's not safe. That new way isn't safe. And so it's okay, let me harm her in some way. Maybe she needs to binge. Maybe that old knee pain, that knee injury from 20 years ago is going to pop back up. Let me throw some pattern back in here so that I can stop her. I know how to move this way. So then back to the safety so that we can work on those patterns.
So that way you can slowly start to shift the body into this place of safety for the healing to open up. And what about so one thing that I find interesting, okay, say that you're in the healing process has started and you're going along and then all of a sudden these old patterns start to resurface. And what are your thoughts about that in the healing journey for those old patterns to surface, for us to heal? And then about the process, do you think they heal more quickly now that we're in this healing stage? Because sometimes I see that with patients that they're an old pattern, let's say you mentioned like a knee injury, that'll come up, but when they're able to I don't know, visualize or be in the place in that moment where they're actually accessing the subconscious trauma pattern, then that they'll be able to like recognize it, see it with a different vision, and then work through it.
I really believe that awareness is a skill that is trainable.
Mm-hmm.
And the more awareness that you can cultivate really from a place of curiosity and not judgment, how is my body speaking to me? What does that mean? Why is this old injury showing up?
Mm-hmm.
And that old injury is an output, a protective output from your brain to shut you down.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you're running patterns where the brain, once again, it just going back to survival, wants to keep you alive, but sometimes it's also looking for you to recreate the pattern, right? Say for the sexual trauma pattern. That had been going on for my whole life. And by the time I got taken in Turkey, I was 32 years old. I wasn't even on Instagram. And that was 14 years ago. I didn't know what that was. But that was a way, because in that sexual assault pattern, because I saved myself, because I protected myself in a way that I had never been able to do, I in that moment stopped that pattern and started going another way. So your patterns are always, those old unwanted patterns, they are always going to show up until you repattern, until you recognize it. And once again, that just goes back to the safety, to build awareness, to look above and get some real altitude on what's happening in your life.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And when we're in that place of healing, so we're accessing those patterns, or we're aware of those patterns. I love that you use the awareness word, because that's so key. Does it only work really on the brain and the nervous system, those patterns, or are they, our body is not just about the brain and the nervous system, of course, but when you're talking about the subconscious and repatterning, are we really talking about just accessing that specific part of the body?
No, I don't think so. I think you also have to access the emotional body and move those emotions out of the body, right? Emotions are energy in motion. And what I have found is when I'm working with men, a lot of that stuck emotional energy is usually grief. And then when I'm working with women, that stuck emotional energy is often anger. And I think this is changing in the world, but when I was growing up, no one taught me how to be angry, that my rage was sacred. But as humans having this human experience, there is a spectrum of emotion that is available to us. And if you are going to repress anger or grief or rage, whatever that is, as quote, a bad emotion, how are you supposed to express joy and live happily and be connected and have community and find support? Once again, and that even goes back to those limiting beliefs. Am I worthy of support? Am I worthy of love? Is that a limiting belief that's holding me back? So just like you're saying, everything is it's this deep web of interconnection.
Yeah. And I like what you guys said too about the emotions that quote unquote, we do consider bad emotions, but that's just part of how our body works. And then we don't have if you're in the, I don't know, 100% happiness, joy every moment, you wouldn't have a perspective of what the other piece looks like, but then being able to quickly recognize it and then be able to shift out of it in a way that is not turning your mind into that place of healing. Oh yeah, I'm having this place of anger, like you mentioned, but how can I like harness it into a way that accelerates my body into this new place, into this shift of healing?
Yeah. I mean, that emotional residue, that gunk that lives in your body, think about a clogged drain in your shower or your bath. It's got all this gunk, right? It's so gross, all this hair, all this stuff. And then what happens when we unclog? Flow. So can we create that in our bodies? And then sometimes healing too, I think a lot of healing is about that blank canvas space. Who am I without the pain? Who am I without the anxiety, the depression, the yo-yoing, oscillating states? Like, who am I if I can live in forgiveness and love versus anger? The anger, we need the rage, it's super sacred. and it's safe. You probably see even kids in the grocery store, they misbehave and they're shut down. Go to your room, go sit in that corner. That child is angry. Let's support the child in the emotional state and get that moving, because that emotional residue is also going to create disease.
Right. Create that
Chronic
pattern.
stress.
Yeah. So true. It's so interesting. I was on a plane last night and there was a little tiny boy. He was probably maybe 2 months old. I'm sorry, 2 years old, like in the toddler stage. And with all, the mom had to keep him on her lap during takeoff and landing. And he was just screaming. He was so angry that he had to be in this place. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I was like, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and I'm going to send him like as much love as I can and help support him. It's okay. You're in this safe environment. Because everybody, I'm sure, is, oh my gosh, I just wish she would just shut him up. And I'm like, that's like exactly the thing that he doesn't need. He needs to know it's okay to be angry in this moment. Who likes to be tied down in a chair and told that you can't move?
Yeah. And he doesn't understand the pressure.
Right.
The air
He doesn't
pressure.
know.
He doesn't know what's going on. That's really beautiful of you to move in that way. And that's a really heart space movement that you did, like to put that out there, not like everybody, because everybody on the plane is, oh my God.
I know, that was my first emotion. I was like, oh, I just want to be in this quiet space. And I was like, that's not really nice for him, and acknowledging his space. And so then I shifted, and I love that it's like that conversation we're talking about, shifting your own mindset. And so I was able, it was not shift, helped me to shift, because it helped my awareness and helped my sympathetic nervous system to be like, oh yeah, it's okay. Everything around you, just be in your own space. Everything's always working out. Okay. He's in a space and let's just help him, and to understand, because flying can be scary, especially like masked every now, like it's just gonna be a scary place for a 2-year-old.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful. It's as within, so without. Can you create the peace in you and the love within you to recreate the world around you?
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay. So we're working on the brain and the nervous system. So I'd love for us to shift to a genetic blueprint. So, and in my mind, and you probably have the same thought process, that we have this physical genetic blueprint, right? And so that's our actual physical DNA within our cells, within our body. And then I also believe that there's like a spiritual, like genetic blueprint of that spiritual aspect of ourselves. So we're talking about the emotional body, the spiritual body. So how does working on the subconscious mind, that subconscious repatterning, then help us to shift that genetic blueprint, whether that's physical and emotional and spiritual, all connected?
Yeah, I deeply believe that we can change the structure of our DNA by doing the deep healing, by healing the ancestral wounds, the generational wounds, and getting back to the essence parts of us that are fragmented off. When we can integrate now that 3-year-old, that 5-year-old, that 8-year-old, whoever it was that experienced that trauma, by integrating that young person in and not letting them so much run the show, right? Because those worthiness patterns, those value patterns, those I can't be loved patterns, that's not Jennifer showing up as 45-year-old, for showing up as a 3-year-old.
Right.
And I really have a 3-year-old running my business, working with clients, trying to seek healthy partnership. And so I believe and healing is not linear. We can always go back to those young versions of ourselves that have those core wounds. And by healing them and reintegrating them, I deeply believe that it changes the structure of the DNA.
Yes. So 100% agree with that. And then
that's so exciting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think, the face of the new future of healing, because when we think about it in that way, we're like, oh, it's possible for me to shift our DNA. It's possible for me to shift like all aspects of my body in healing when I am given the right tools and I'm on that right space. I've opened the right doorway. I'm in the right openness. I'm allowing my body to receive and let go. And like you said, accessing all the different paths of our childhood, or maybe on a different timeline, accessing that different timeline and then going back in time and then moving forward, whatever it is.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's like science, metaphysics, all the getting back to the chakra system, and then the emotional body. It's so deeply layered. And then we get to show up as new versions of ourselves, like really people who can stand in our power and our divine truths. And how nice it is to stand in that place of certainty versus showing up how my job wants me to show up, how my partner wants me to show up. Right now, I can stand here as me in my fullness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's feels really special and gooey in the center.
Yeah. And I love what you said too about healing isn't linear. And I think that is one of the, I don't know, hang up is such a strange word, but in maybe the aspect of our current state of healthcare is that most of the physicians that are out there have been trained in linear thought process with healing. And that's why we're seeing so much chronic illness moving forward and so much at a younger age and children being sick. It's like we can't have a linear process of healing. That's not how our body works. And I think that's such a huge important thing that you said.
It's interesting, the Western medical paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going through breast cancer treatment, I worked with a Chinese doctor, I worked with
Mm-hmm.
a holistic foundation, and I worked with my oncologist. But when I would go to my oncologist, who I trusted I really did. Then I wanted to talk about my diet and how I was eating and then what my spiritual work, it was
Right.
there was no conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to get shut down when I was there, and I was doing a great job through
Mm-hmm.
that cancer healing. So I was just like, you don't
Right.
want to listen to me? That's fine.
Yeah.
I have these other two places that I can talk about what's really happening in my body and in my healing experience with another doctor. So I think too, as very young people, we are taught to give our healing away,
Mm-hmm.
trust other people with our healing. And sometimes we do need help with our healing in that sense, but the body is miraculous. It's
Mm-hmm.
divinely intelligent, right? You have all this ancient wisdom and divine knowledge and this beautiful physical space that is very good at healing if you can let it do what it does and support it.
So true. And I love what you said about that own place of healing, because we have the power for that self-healing. And I think a lot of us have maybe forgotten it because, like you said, we've been trained out of it. Oh, just take this pill, you'll instantly feel better. And then suppress your body's natural ability to heal and just move on, instead of like really addressing, like, why did I have that migraine? Or why did I have that really heavy cycle? Whatever it is.
Right.
Instead of looking at it and tuning into it and asking your body, maybe asking your emotional body, was I processing some emotional piece? Was I really stressed out? Was I angry or whatever? And I think tuning back in to our own place of healing is going to be so important for the next phase of our planet. We have to have that, because self-healing then allows the planet to heal.
Oh, true. It's so true. And the consciousness of our planet is rising, and we need to meet her.
Yeah, we can't suppress that anymore. We've seen that, what happens with that over the past 2 years, for sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Challenging. We live in a challenging time.
Yeah. Yes, true. And can you talk a little bit about how you work with, if you could give an example, I think would be really key for our listeners to understand what that looks like when you're working with someone to reprogram or repattern that subconscious. Because I think a lot of people just don't, I don't know, it can be like hard to people to grasp. So maybe just a quick example of a person coming in and what that process looks like in that reprogramming stage.
So I facilitate with BrainBased Wellness under Elizabeth Kristoff. I know she's been she sat with you pretty recently, I believe.
Yes.
And so I use her method in the subconscious reprogramming container. And the first thing that we do is we will always create safety in the body. We do that with vagus nerve training and with respiration training. Because of my experience in healing and working with clients, I'm highly intuitive, but I can often sit with people and I'm looking at their patterns all the time. I'm listening to what they're saying, and I can often see the pattern first, but I will not say anything about that first. I want you to be guided into that space, because like we were saying before, the brain gives you more when you feel safe with learning more and going deeper. And healing is about peeling back that onion of layers. And so subconscious patterning isn't really the first place we start. We start with applied neurology, create that safety. We find deficits in the nervous system. We see, where's that threat bucket? Where are we, what is the protective output that the brain is giving us? Are you living with pain? Are you living with migraines? Are you a binge eater? Is it, what are we dealing with first? Let's start healing that pattern. And then as we go, we can open up a little bit further into the subconscious work, right? Talking about scarcity, or are the patterns that are showing up for you, like I said, built-in worthiness.
Right.
Because if you are showing up and you don't think that you are worthy of XYZ, we need to figure out where that young person lives and heal that young person so that you can understand that you are worthy. You are inherently worthy and lovable and wanting to receive. And then thinking about receiving, for getting back to working with women, that divine feminine energy that's super on the rise right now in the world. She is receiving, but we have been living so linear, right? So linear. A lot of us women, we are burnt out, we're overworking, we're under being.
Right.
So how can we heal those patterns? And then little by slowly, we can start looking at the subconscious mind, because those patterns, actually, this just happened. My friend's mom 80th birthday was on Saturday, and a pattern that she wanted to work with was her worth. And so so we did our medicine, we worked together. It was a full day immersion. And then the next day, someone asked her, saw her moving boxes out of the shed. This 80-year-old lady, 10 boxes she moved from the shed. And her friend was like, hang on, I really want to help you with that. Just let me go grab some coffee. I'll be right back. In that time, she moved those completely negated what the person wanted to do and moved those 10 boxes into her car. And then the friend came out and was like, why did you do that? And so then the next day we're exploring, are you not worthy to receive? And her kind of comeback was, I'm a giver. I have a hard time receiving. I just want to give. As a giver, if you want to give yourself and someone's shutting you down, how are you able to give? How you can't receive and not give. So that worthiness pattern was showing up for her as, I'm not worthy to receive help.
I love that. Thank you for giving that example, because I think it's so key. And a lot of people in that space, especially healers and listeners that are, experiencing that chronic disease state, because it's like, I think of it like a lock and a key. If you have this padlock, right? It's like, you're like locked that healing away in this trunk. And you're like, I keep trying to open the key, but the key never fits. And so it's like, once they finally get the key in, they're like, oh yeah, I could finally turn it. And then that healing starts to be there for them to receive. But and especially as healers, like we give, and then, oh no, I can't, you can't help me. I'm just going to give you a little bit more. And then, like you said, that burnout phase, that giving phase starts to take over. And especially as women, because we are the nurturers, it's part of as having children and being in that childbearing phase. But I think the taking ourselves out of that place of community, which is really, especially the past 2 years, has really shifted for us. And then now I think people are like, oh yeah, I must have this community. It has to be this real part of that support system, and to enable me to have the space, the support for the receiving of that healing.
I love what you said about the lock and key, because the key for her repatterning that worth pattern at that moment was to receive help. So in that moment, she went right back into her old pattern where she had the opportunity to receive and repattern. I am worthy of receiving. Even as women, being that we are such givers and over givers, right? A lot of times women, moms, are the last person at the end of the day to receive their cup filling, instead of being the first person to fill their cup so that they can serve better. We just get into giving all away. And then where does that leave you?
Yeah, it leaves you totally in that empty cup.
Totally depleted.
Yeah. And that's not good for anyone, especially yourself, for that place of self-healing. And that's a big place that I work with my patients all the time. Just like, that mindset piece, that self-care piece, and making yourself the priority. And if you were able to, in every moment, make yourself the priority and know that from that place, it was coming from your trueness, like what a different place your life would be if you came from that place.
Yes. And then once again, too, even that place is like a heart space, not the
Mhm.
head,
Right.
mind, ego space.
Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
too, there's a lot of working from the top down instead of working from the bottom up. And it's like that lower part of the chakra system, that safety of the root chakra,
Hmm.
a lot of women also too have sexual violations and body boundary violations that we live with every day.
Right.
And so that lives in the lower part of our system. You can't headspace your way into safety. That
Yes. Yeah, you can think your way into it. This is true. It has to
yeah.
be from that emotional perspective. So that's a good question, like kind of segue into that. What about the PTSD part? And because I think when we're talking about trauma, especially I work a lot with veterans and that
Mm.
place, they're in that trauma space. And when that trauma starts to, we were talking about that, even the lock, once it's starting to come out, it's like they immediately go into this place of like anxiety. And how can we create that safe place when we're trying to move through that PTSD into this place of like relaxation, allowing us to be into that parasympathetic mode?
Yeah, this is really great to explore. I've only worked with one veteran actually, and most of my clients have CPTSD, complex
Mhm.
PTSD, where now we've got emotional flashbacks. There's a lot of hypervigilance, but that's the same thing that we do
Right.
see in our veterans, that hypervigilant state. And we never want to revisit trauma so much that we are re-traumatizing ourselves. And so there are drills that we'll find, I think vagus nerve and respiration,
Mm-hmm.
once again, can we create the safety in the body?
Mm-hmm.
Then explore what we have been through. And then through the spiritual work, can we find our purpose within what we've been through as a soul in a human body? Did I sign up for this?
Mm-hmm.
Have I already contracted myself to have cancer, to go through a sex trafficking, to have this early childhood sexual trauma? Because all of those have led me to my purpose, to
Mm-hmm.
my life, healing that. And so it's sometimes about sitting above it in a spiritual way. But
Mm-hmm.
how can we sit at it from that height if it's not safe to explore?
I love that. Yeah, that perspective, being able to have the perspective in a safe place of
Yes.
your timeline of what's
Yeah.
happened in your life.
Yeah. And what you've been through. I can't imagine what it's like to be at war.
Right. Yeah, I can't
From
either.
what your conscience has the capability to hold, and how much of that gets
Mm-hmm.
repressed, just like our
Right.
early childhood sexual traumas are often repressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And get back to that clog in the emotional body. Can we start freeing up the emotional clog as well, and
Mm-hmm.
really looking for the purpose in our stories?
Yeah.
That's a great acceptance to sit with, and being like, because when I finally found forgiveness for my captor and realizing, a lot of times we'll think about our soul agreements and contracts on a positive level. Oh, wow, look at this experience. Look at maybe me and Elizabeth Kristoff, for example. We have a contract to do this deep healing work together. Like, how beautiful that we found each other. But how can I accept her as a soul agreement and not think of my captor as a soul agreement as well? And
Mm-hmm.
I really found forgiveness in finding that, like, he sacrificed his karma for
Mm-hmm.
me to serve my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
God, I must be really thankful for him, to
Yeah.
find gratitude in the suffering, even with my early childhood predator.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because now I can support other women in their journeys as they are exploring this really deep wound
Yeah.
that has really set the patterns and belief in motion of how she's showing up in the world.
So important. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that piece, because I think the gratitude is a huge aspect of the healing. And when you're in that place of down, when you're deep down in that dark well of and trying to get out of it, trying to see that light and move through into that place of healing, that place of having gratitude can sometimes be a tricky one, but you're like, where do I even start? And then so I tell my patients, just start at something really basic. Like, I'm just grateful for my bed, like how it supports me, how it helps me to sleep through the night, and then slowly start to move into the things that can be traumatizing to even bring up.
It's so true. And oftentimes I'll tell people, like, even when I'm on a walk and I'm out in nature, it's thank you for being able to see this. Thank you for being able to feel this, for the movement in my legs, for the breath in my lungs. Like, it's beautiful to live with gratitude. It has such a high vibration to it. You will, and then getting into receiving, it's thank you. I receive that.
Yeah, that's a good circle back to what you were talking about before.
Yeah. Small gratitude practices, I think, lead to big gratitude practices. But once again, like, it's hard. Like you were saying, you're in the depths of this. Very hard to be thankful for a man who's kidnapped you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes separation and then rejoining, being able to see, for like you're saying, that perspective, like from our higher self, being able to see down and see, oh yeah, this is perspective. This is, how did I see that helping me in my healing journey? What perspective can I have? How does it helping to shift into this new place of healing and to open the new doorways that I had closed in my healing process because I was too scared, too fearful of what that new place. And I think rewriting that healing journey, rewriting your story. I talked to my patients about that. And you mentioned it earlier. How do you see yourself if you had this specific illness, if you were free of it, what would your life be like? And I think that can really be, sometimes that's the scary place for people because they're so supported in their illness. Oh, this person does this for me, etc.
And when you've been living in that for a lot of times decades, you're really attached to that pain, to that suffering, to that anxiety. Like it almost becomes this kind of, getting back to the brain, a really easy place to survive.
Right. Yeah. It's that survival place. Okay.
Okay. I get this. I know I'm going to binge.
It's comfortable.
I'm gonna shut the world out. Everything's fine. I'll get up tomorrow and I'll try again.
Right. Yeah. It's like in the routine, in the rhythm of the repeating pattern can create a place of safety, even if it's not a place of healing.
Yes. And I think healing too is like an upward spiral. And then you might see the same thing, but as you get a little bit higher, okay, let me look at it again from this level. Oh, okay, it's coming up again, but look, I've come up a little bit higher, and you just continue to grow altitude until you can fully heal that particular spot.
So true. And one thing that you mentioned a little while ago, I'd love for us to come back to, is the genetic piece of our timeline of our family history, our genealogy, our relatives. And we have lived a lot through specific trauma with our family lineage. So how do we address that from that repatterning of the subconscious, getting into that genetic pattern of us bringing in things from our past into the future timeline, into our present timeline of our family history?
As it goes, they say that the eggs that were in your mom that you come from were also in your grandmother's body. Right? So you're actually carrying 2 generations prior to, you are carrying 3 generations of trauma in your body. So if my grandmother maybe she was raped, or maybe she has deep racial trauma, because that would have been she would have been growing up in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, that was not a place for women. We're finally coming into, hopefully, some balance of equality now.
Right. Yes. I think so. It seems better.
Yeah. We come from places where women have been shut down, and that lives in you, to be quiet, to not express, to not be visible. And then when you think of people who have maybe African-American, people of color, think of their generational wounds that they carry. But my ancestors, they could have owned slaves. Lives in me to dismantle that racial oppression. Also starts with me, even though I am not a person of color. My heritage at some point probably did some bad things. Who knows? Maybe there were witches in my lineage. How did that go for them? Women of the earth, women of herbs, and that level of healing. And then that's more shut down. So I think when we heal, we have the ability to go back into those lines. I can heal my mom's wounds. I can heal my grandmother's wounds, and calling on that even ancestral support on a spiritual level. Who's around me? Who's hanging around here right now that also wants to be supported and healed? And that, getting back to that that's going to change your DNA. That's going to change the expression. And I don't know a ton about epigenetics, but right, that's about how the gene is going to express. And we can shut those down too, right? Cancer for me wasn't something that I didn't have the genes for that. Like I said, HER2 is about that protein gene that we all carry, but there are people out there that carry those genes. So can we heal and stop the turning on of that gene to express to then produce cancer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think I love what you said about us bringing things forward in our current state, which we don't always relate to and think about from our emotional and genetic perspective. Like you said, owning different people in different places around the world, but all types of places. And it just makes me feel so sad for bringing that forward into my own personal being. And I think, and being able to recognize that and feel the suffering for all of the people that have bringing that forward, ready for us to shift that, because we don't really have the space to carry that around anymore. It's just not serving any of us anymore. We're ready
we really
to let
don't.
it go.
And to understand that when you are in the presence of another human being, that is another soul in a body, is divine. And that is where equality starts, because is there really a hierarchy of soul?
Right. No.
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 Heck
Yeah.
no.
Right.
Paul Chek, a practitioner that I studied under for my holistic lifestyling certification, says you don't have to like everybody, but you do have to love them.
Right.
I love that so much.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. And they're coming into our space because it's even just a tiny second of interaction, right? There's some reason why we're connected. And then we can change everything moving forward just on that little tiny interaction. And it's how we come into that moment and releasing, maybe like you said, like that past trauma coming forward, and how we can change it moving forward and letting it go finally from our timeline.
And thinking about coming into those places and connections with people who have more deeper generational wounds, like racial trauma, and how you can help support them just by being kind. By being a safe space in the world for anyone, really. That's the thing about kindness, is that your kindness doesn't stop with you.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't stop in the container of these walls. It moves into the world. It moves into your family. It moves into your communities. And that's really where I think the love and kindness space affects so far back, so deep, so deeply.
Right. Yeah. And if we were talking earlier about that quantum timeline, if we can bring in that healing for the present moment, it can be shifted through any space and time. And I think that's the great piece about the genetic healing, is that we are able to access it in the past, in this present moment, but also affect our genetic healing in the future, which I think is like the super amazing place that we're becoming aware of. Oh yeah, how can I shift? And that was one things I wanted to talk to you about. How can we shift our DNA in our current space to have this upgrade? Right?
Well, yeah. And I think part of that too is the physiological, what are you consuming every day? Like, we are mineral. We are energy. We are electricity. So are you supporting yourself to take in good nutrients? Are you giving your body what it needs to thrive?
Yeah.
And if you're eating fast food, if you're eating a lot of processed foods, and that's a staple part of your diet, where did those animals come from?
Right.
Is that the happy cow? Is that the happy chicken that just had like one bad day? Or are we talking about an animal that has been pumped with so much adrenaline and cortisol and unhappiness? And then what are you consuming?
Yeah.
That animal's tragedy.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of ethical practices, I think, that really need to come into play to balance the actual physical state of the body, to nurture it. And once again, supporting it to let it do what it does.
Yeah. Allowing that healing to come into place. And I really liked what you said about, being conscious of what we have coming in, whether I think I see it from a perspective a lot of times where patients are limiting themselves with food and nutrients, because they've come into a place where they're like, oh, this particular food is going to cause me this reaction. So they completely restrict that food. And then it causes a lot of genetic programming, subconscious patterning around that specific food. Sometimes our body does have a reaction, but we don't want to imprint it. We don't want to say like every time this piece of food comes in, like maybe it's gluten is a great example. Every time I'm even in proximity, I will have a reaction. And I see that with patients, especially with celiac. And I think there's that place we have to come to like love. Okay, it's okay. My body is going to be in a safe place when I eat this. It's okay for me to eat the good food that's going to nurture me and not have a reaction where it's completely shutting my body down from healing.
Yeah, food is such an interesting thing too, because
Totally.
we're seeing such a shift in eating, in ethical practices of like farming, of agriculture, but also like the
Right.
animal agriculture, like everything is really changing. And I do believe there is a lot of additives in our food, like you getting back to gluten that you mentioned, like gluten is just in basically everything. It's in your
Right.
self tanner, it's in like your eyelash glue, it's in literally everything. Be so careful about what we're taking in, but you really can. I do believe that you can heal those things
Yeah,
when you
100%.
address your trauma.
Right. Yeah. Back to that. Right. Yeah.
Back to trauma. It
Yeah.
always goes back to trauma.
100%. Right. Yeah. That's so true. So true. And so that's a great place for us to talk about like meditation. Cause I think, when you're talking about healing the DNA, healing that trauma, how does meditation come into play and that place of inner work, that place of calm and peace?
I'm a huge fan of meditation. For myself, it feels very safe. I love it. It's a practice for me every day, sometimes at night as well. Meditation can sometimes be really misunderstood as
Right.
it's presented as this like great cure-all, right? Meditate, and
Right.
then you'll somehow bypass all these other symptoms and situations. But if you are someone who sits down to meditate and your hands get clammy, your mouth goes dry, your
Right.
heart starts to race, you get to sweating, stop meditating.
Right. That's
That
not a
is
good place.
not parasympathetic, that is not rested to digest. Your body doesn't feel safe. So then there are other ways to meditate, right? There's walking meditations. Maybe you're someone who likes to garden or play the piano. Those can take you into deep meditative places while you are doing something else and have time to reflect at the same time. But as for me, meditating is very safe. I enjoy it very much and it gives me time. I also like to pray. So when I pray, I feel like that's me speaking to source, to God, to divine intelligence. And then when I meditate, that is source speaking to me.
I love that.
And I
And
love
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so great. And I really like what you said too about that place. If you're not feeling like you're comfortable, you want to take a break from that and try something else, because there are lots of different forms of meditation, and meditation doesn't have to be. I lived at a yoga retreat center where I would meditate for an hour, like 3 times a day. And I did that for a while. I think it was a healing time for me. But then now I don't do that. I don't practice that because I know that I don't need that place. I think when I was doing that, I really needed that place of real inner work. And that was a way for me to do it and to have that healing take place. But now I have this connection where I can tune into myself so much easier and more quickly, but also I can enable myself to do more things if I'm not spending like 3 hours meditating.
Wow. I bet that was an amazing experience for you. Like how beautiful, wonderful.
It was.
And I think too, if you can sit in quiet or you're doing that walking meditation, like sometimes it's not safe to shut your eyes and sit just with your body, but you can always put a hand on your body and ask your body, what does it need from you?
Right.
What does it want? And if you sit there long enough, or you garden with that thought, or whatever it is that you're doing, sit with that and let the body.
Yes. Tuning into listening to yourself. And that's the key for the trauma piece, this whole conversation about being able to tap into what your body needs and listening to where maybe it's just a little tiny thought, right? One little piece, and then following that thread, like deeper and deeper on that place of like in meditation or that relaxation place.
Definitely. And then in that DNA gene place, being that we are spirits in a human body, it wants to connect on that genetic DNA level, wants to connect to source. And a lot of times as we go on and on, we just get further connected from what we are.
Right. Further disconnected. further
Yeah, we
disconnected,
often
right?
get, we live lives of disconnect, and then we
Right.
get into the healing space, and it's okay. I've done psychological healing. I've done physiological healing.
Mhm.
Now I need to connect back to spirit.
Yeah, connect. Yeah, one of my personal things that I do is, and I try to be in the moment as much as I can, where I'm connecting to myself, connecting to source with each thing that I do. And of course, I'm not doing it every moment of every living moment of my day, but I try to be conscious of it, especially if I'm in a place where I feel triggered emotionally, something's coming up. I'm like, okay, what is this? What is this meaning for me in this moment in time? And I'm like, okay, I can just connect into my body, listen, like you said, listen to what the expression is. How am I feeling in a specific area of my body? Is my neck tense? Is my back tense? Where is it coming to? Is it a pattern place? Like we were talking about, is it a place like, every time, I don't know, every time I'm stressed, I have my stomach hurts, something like that. So I think that's really a great place to begin to have that body awareness, to then dive deep into that subconscious of healing.
Well, I think staying present for people in general is really challenging, especially when
Yes.
it's very challenging.
So challenging.
Like, what's coming up next week? What's in the year ahead? What am I
Right.
looking to be? Who am I
Right.
looking to be? And always staying in that future place. But if you think about it, when you're in the present moment and you're being really fully present, the body is always present. That's why you can walk into a room, you pick up a vibe, and you're like, things are feel right, because the body is always present. And if the body is picking up on those clues, because we've been taught, like, you think, you act, and then you feel. That's not true. You
Right.
feel something first.
Yeah.
Then you think about it, or then you act on it, and then you think about it.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. So it's about staying in that present moment. And in the present moment is where all the possibility is.
Yeah. So true. Yes.
Yeah. And staying in that kind of flow state. Let me follow my intuition. Intuition's telling me to change lanes. Go to that park today. Go to that park.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Go a
Being in
different
that
route.
flow
Yeah.
state. Exactly. Go a
Yeah.
different route. I was planning to eat sushi. I feel like a sandwich.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Being in the moment.
And really starting with very simple things like that. Like you're traveling on the highway, something's telling you to get in the other lane, change lanes.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And that pathway, that lane relates to our path in life, and being able to step off into different path at any moment, right? You're like, oh yeah, this is my healing path over here. This feels really good. Maybe I'll try a new modality. Maybe I'll, try acupuncture, or I don't know what it is. Try something else to enliven or activate that healing within in a different way, because our body's always changing. Everything around us is always changing.
I love what you just said, because there is no one path to healing.
Right.
Try all the modalities. Try anything that calls to you. Just try it. Bring it in.
Right.
And
yeah. Why not?
it's not going to work. But you also have to experience the contrast of life to know what's not good.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. If you don't try it, you're never going to know.
Yeah,
right.
It's all trial and error. Try anything and everything, but also regulate your nervous system.
Right. Yes.
So that you can try all the other things too.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes. I think that's a great end of our conversation. Regulate the nervous system. I think we could talk for a really long time, Jennifer, but I want to be aware of our time today. And as we're wrapping up, I have one last fun question. Then we're going to help people find you and know how they can connect with you. If you had an unlimited budget right now, what would you do to make the biggest impact on the planet?
I would support children in foster care, in homes. I would support the healing of children.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So yeah, so needed. We really, especially for that new generation that's coming up and changing, and especially the children that are growing up in this time of the pandemic, they need us more than ever right now. I just can't even imagine the things that they've been going through, and this whole trauma conversation. We're going to really be needing to support them and helping them, everyone, but especially the children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shine your light on children.
Yeah, that's right. The biggest light you can.
Then when you're out, smile at them, send them love, be energetically supportive of children. And if you can support them in their trauma care, do that. Lift them up.
Right. Be that place. I love that. Jennifer, it's been such a wonderful conversation. Tell our listeners how they can find you, follow you, the best way to keep touch with all that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the listeners for letting me have this safe container to express and to show up. And I am very easy to find across the board. I am Illuminated with Jennifer. So it's at Illuminated with Jennifer on social media. And if you want to email me, it's illuminatedwithjennifer@gmail. I'm super easy. And I would
Nice.
love to connect with anybody who has resonated with what we've talked about today. It's just been such a fun conversation.
Wonderful. We'll make sure we put all that in the show notes. And then also you have a little freebie. If someone would like to learn more about what you do and connect with you, you have a free consultation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I hope that you'll join me on this consultation. If I am not the practitioner for you, I would love to guide you into another practitioner that I am connected to, because through the podcast, I have a vast wealth of resources for you to explore. And it's just a great honor to sit with someone and support them in their healing. I am a healer, but I don't do that. I guide you because you have the answers already. I am just here to support you in your healing container. I think I'm a really safe space for men and for women to come to, and it's really a great privilege.
I love that. Thank you. Thanks again, Jennifer. It's been such a joy to have you on the show today. I loved our conversation and I can't wait to share it with the world.
Me too. Thank you so much.